Japan's wartime pain. Philip Short is the BBC's Tokyo correspondent. Philip, is this the definitive apology?
It's certainly the most definitive so far, and I think it's a big step forward. You know, we must give credit where credit is due to Mr. Murayama. But there is ambiguity about the form in which it was uttered. The Cabinet approved it, but was it approving it as a statement by the Prime Minister, or was it approving it as a collective unified view of the government? We know it's a very divided government, and the fact that the ministers went to Yasukuni's shrine showed that. So I think, don't underestimate this as a step forward, but don't underestimate the profound divisions in the government and in Japan as a whole about how the war should be assessed.
Thank you very much. I'm joined now from London by the Japanese ambassador there, Mr. Hiroki Fuji. You heard those doubts, Mr. Fuji, and surely many people share them. Are the apologies really those of the Japanese cabinet, or are they just Mr. Murayama's?
I think there should be no misunderstanding that this statement is a statement by the Japanese government, approved by the cabinet.
But it could mean that the cabinet said that it was all right for Mr. Murayama to say that he personally apologised. That is where this area of linguistic uncertainty exists, isn't it?
I think there is no linguistic uncertainty at all in this case, and cabinet definitely approved as a statement of Japanese government by Mr. Murayama, and this is the most clear and comprehensive statement Japanese government ever made on this question.
But Ambassador, he could have said the government apologises, the cabinet apologises, Japan apologises, and surely there'll continue to be doubts so long as it appears that what he said was, I apologise. Nobody doubts his sincerity.
I think those linguistic questions are really unsubstantial, because this is the most formal way the Japanese government expressed something. That is, first the approval by the cabinet, and then the Prime Minister himself read the statement. And so this is the statement by the
What about compensation, Ambassador, finally? Is there any question of compensation for the victims?
The question of compensation is now at the court, so I don't like to dwell, but the San Francisco Peace Treaty, which specifically refers to prisoners of war, has legally settled the question. That is the government position. But we have all the sympathies toward the POWs.
Ambassador, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Well, British veterans of the war in the Pacific laid their wreath to commemorate VJ Day at County Hall today. County Hall, of course, is owned by a Japanese company, and to start with, they tried to refuse the ceremony to take place. But eventually, they did allow representatives of the Royal British Legion onto the County Hall to lay their wreath at the memorial. And this morning's ceremony will be followed by a number of national events in Britain over the weekend. I'm joined now from outside County Hall by the representative of the Royal British Legion branch there, Bert Reeves. Mr. Reeves, do you regard this morning's apology as satisfactory?
No, not at all. I think the Prime Minister could have apologised on behalf of the government. That is the word we want to hear, the government, not the Cabinet. We know that Cabinets are supportive of Prime Ministers, as in our country.
But it's a step forward. Mr. Reeves, sorry, it's a step forward for the Prime Minister, in a statement approved by the Cabinet, to use the word apologise. Everyone's been clamouring, say apologise, and now he's said it.
That's still not enough. We want the Prime Minister to apologise for the government and the Cabinet and the whole of the Japanese nation for the atrocities they committed during the last war on some of our prisoners.
Are you also insisting, or will you continue to fight for compensation, or is it the apology which still matters to you most?
The matter of compensation was mentioned by the Prime Minister today when he made his speech, and to my mind that he brought up the question of compensation that has already been paid. Now that is true, we know that, but surely this matter is sub judice at the moment, and the court in Tokyo has decided what amount of whether compensation should be provided and not the Prime Minister.
Bert Reeves, thank you very much indeed. Well, one of the great symbols of the wartime, of the war, the clash between Britain and Japan was, of course, forced labour, the use of forced labour by the Japanese. And, of course, the building by British forced labour of the railway through Thailand and Burma, the bridge over the River Kwai, this has become one of the great symbols of that. Allied prisoners were used to do it, and, of course, many of them died in the process. There was a case of a joint commemoration which took place on the River Kwai today, and that was along the line of that railway between Thailand and Burma. But many of the Allies who were forced to work on the railway line boycotted those reconciliation ceremonies, and they plan to hold their own commemoration at the weekend, which will exclude the Japanese.
These days, the train has to ease its way through tourists as it crosses the bridge on the River Kwai. It carries mainly sightseers and commuters to and from Bangkok, 80 miles away. The original bridge, which the Japanese built to take munitions and supplies, was destroyed by Allied bombers in 1945. But that was far too prosaic an ending for the film which inspired the legend. The brutality towards prisoners of war depicted in the film was closer to reality. The Burma-Thailand Railway cost the lives of 16,000 POWs and 100,000 native labourers. In place of the makeshift graves, those who died are now commemorated in the war cemetery in the small town of Kanchanaburi, where a brief and simple ceremony was held. The lives of 2 British and 1 Japanese veteran looking on were changed forever by their wartime experience. The events being remembered here have created plenty of myths, but some of the things which have happened since are almost stranger than fiction. Takashi Nagase was an interpreter for the Japanese equivalent of the Gestapo and witnessed many acts of torture. He built his own temple at the River Kwai and returned many times as his own personal act of atonement.
I can't stand that horrible scene. So I swear myself to come again and pay homages to save my soul.
When I first went home, I had hatred in my heart. It went slowly. And I hoped that before they died, the others would feel the same way.
This was a day of commemoration for men who have found reconciliation with former enemies. Others hadn't been able to cope with the past in the same way. Neil Bennett, BBC News, at the River Kwai in Thailand.
Some of the most poignant ceremonies will be taking place in Singapore. The then British colony was occupied for 3 years by the Japanese, and thousands of Allied servicemen died either in the prisoner of war camps or being used as forced labourers.
In solemn pilgrimage, they've come here from all over Britain for dawn remembrance of the Allied memorial.
Inside the camp is found more terrible proof of Japanese brutality.
For those taken prisoner in Singapore, the memories are dark and harrowing. Brutality and malnutrition was far worse than in the camps in Europe, and Changi Jail was the most notorious.
From my old camp. And was totally on their backs, starving and dying.